clubs in Ontario now that are playing at the youth level, as well as 4 playing at the senior level, and that's good. We're getting there. It's going to take some time.
Do you have any concerns, I suppose, that the Wolfpack pulling out of Super League this year and the ramifications of that could undermine all that, or do you think that those things are now in place?
No, we're stuck at home in quarantine still. I mean, people don't even, a lot of people who aren't going to the games probably aren't aware of what's happening with the Wolfpack right now because they're not marketing it the same way. Like, you might think of Wolfpack as this massive team, but, or with all this fun, 10,000 fans of the game is great, but, everyone else puts, the Blue Jays, when they're bad, get 30,000 fans of the game, right? So I think it takes time, and I don't think it really hurts them that much. I think the press here, other than Neil Davidson, who's done some really great pieces, the press over here in Canada don't pick up a lot of this. So you're not hurting really a lot of what you'd be developing other than brand awareness and growing of what it would have happened, being able to market the Super League, putting money to get it on TV. Sonny Bill Williams would have had so much momentum here. That's what you're hurting. But I think the work they've done, I don't think any of this really impacts the momentum off of the field from a Canadian perspective, which is a little sad to say, but I think we're in that phase where I don't think it really hurts it too much.
I think that's the most positive thing you've said.
I think and what I will say,
that gives you optimism, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think the one thing to add, and these are two direct comparisons. The Toronto FC at one point was the worst, soccer team in the world. There's a famous quote from the captain of Toronto FC, and then they've now been in 3 of the last 4 MLS Cup finals in the last few years. They've had big money signings. They've been very exciting to watch. And then you look at the Toronto Raptors, who are now the NBA champions this year, and they were a pretty bad franchise for a long time. But how many Canadians were on that team in the NBA championship or are in the NBA? It takes a lot of momentum to build up a sport when you've only got one team in a country. And I think that's one thing that people have to realize is we're not in the heartlands of rugby league. And even with the Raptors, who are now the NBA champions, or, the MLS Cup, which now we have multiple leagues in Canada for soccer, it takes time to do things and develop it and fund it. And it's even harder when no one knows about your sport.
And because in sport in Canada, generally you don't have that many Canadians except for hockey. So one of the big things we've seen on the social media is people are like, oh, well, how are you going to even cheer for if they're not Canadian? I don't care if you're from Toowoomba. I don't care if you're from Leeds. If you're putting on a Wolfpack jersey, you're honorary Canadian. The guys have loved it here. It is what it is, right? We don't care where you're from. As long as you're willing to be engaging and play good rugby league, awesome. Welcome. Enjoy enjoy the maple syrup, enjoy some Timbits, and say A a couple times, you're good to go.
And then pop into the beer garden after the game, guys?
Exactly. And that's the thing. That's the biggest missed opportunity is getting the Super League teams over here to see what Toronto's about. There's maybe 2 teams that have complained about us. One of them because his breakfast sandwich or his sausage wasn't big enough in the morning, and the other one's been a couple owners who are well known for complaining about anything. But everyone else who's come over here has admitted what kind of a time they've had and how great the actual experience has been. There's been some missteps, but not being able to get all the owners of Super League and their coaches and their players over here to experience it is the one big miss of all of this.
Well, hopefully from your guys' perspective and me as a pro expansionist as well, that gets to happen down the line, and and Toronto are back fully firing and sort out some of their issues as well as a result of all this, and that would be fantastic from my perspective. And thanks for joining me, guys, to talk through it from the Toronto perspective too.
Awesome, it's been great to be here. I think we all hope that all the issues get sorted out, the players get paid, the families get sorted out, and we're no longer talking about this when we're a week away from rugby league coming back. We're all talking about Toronto, which is crazy.
Amen to that.
Awesome. Thanks again to Henry and Scott. It was great to talk to those guys, get their perspective on things. Clearly passionate about rugby league, but I've obviously learnt a few things about how the sport is goes about its ways. Not always things that the fans are going to be pleased with, fans of Toronto as well as fans of all of the clubs in the UK. So thanks to those guys for their perspective. Alan, me and Sarah obviously had our snap reactions to the big news of Toronto's withdrawal last week. Do you want to give your sort of feelings on it before we get into some other news and some fan views?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things are covered by news stories, but I suppose one of my key takeaways is actually it's a welcome to the rugby league family, to Toronto. You've been involved in some level of scandal or controversy or hatred of each other, and that's part of the growing process of rugby league. So, it's a formative experience for them all. So, we've all had our moments, haven't we? So.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Do we have a flag at Wigan that says hated, adored, but never ignored? I mean, that tells you all it needs to tell you.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're just integrating themselves perfectly. That's all. But yeah, no, it's good to hear from them, and they had some interesting points to make. Yeah, even though I might not agree with all of them.
Yeah, and it was good that overall they're still positive about, even though they think the sport's gone the wrong way at times with its development in the last few years, they're still positive and gave an insight that there is a development there of grassroots, and we hopefully don't want to see that end, whatever happens with the Wolfpack. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of my frustrations that I think has been touched on in passing, but there's been a lot of discussion about the detail, is that there is one of the kind of key gaps around it is their lack of integration in terms of their locality, other than the game day experience, which I think everyone accepts as being excellent.
Yeah.
Their lack of connections, or the slowness to develop things like local player pathways and that kind of thing, is something that you can look at as a key criticism from my point of view.
Yeah, and even where it has kind of got rugby league in schools, it's more because there's teachers like Nicholas, who we'll hear from in the fan views, who put the game into their schools that they work at, rather than the Wolfpack reaching out. And actually, this was one of the points. We had a bit of a chat afterwards and beyond the interview for the show and stuff. One of the points that I kind of disagree with Henry and Scott on is around sort of thinking it's not the Wolfpack's responsibility to work on development in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada. Well, I would disagree with that. Whilst they should be supported and given an idea of how to develop those pathways by the RFL and by the clubs established in this country, there's no way that Wigan, Leeds, Hull, Hull KR, St Helens, all these clubs aren't hugely important in the community development in their areas. And even though community clubs might say they don't get enough support from the professional clubs, they do get a hell of a lot of support from the professional clubs and involvement from the professional clubs in the local competitions. So even if it's just availability of past players at the community clubs to go back for presentations evenings and simple stuff like that. So I do think there has to be some onus and responsibility on the professional clubs, be it the Wolfpack, the Aces, or whoever, in development. And like you say, it looks like an area where the Wolfpack haven't necessarily stepped up to the plate yet.
Yeah. I do think that one of the key lessons from this is how we expand and where we expand has to be tied into the broader development of talent within the game. There is no value actually for moving players from Leigh to Toronto to play for a couple of seasons. It has no benefit to the broader game ultimately, and the lack of North American players within the squad, particularly in the first year when they're playing League One and putting cricket scores on teams by bullying them with players that are from a level above. The lack of development of domestic players at that point is, from my point of view, the biggest mistake that the Wolfpack have made to date.
And it doesn't help endear them to some of the more parochial UK-based fans as well, does it?
Absolutely, because if you're treading all over them 3 years ago. If you're of that kind of mindset, you're going to come back and you're going to make the most of the fall, aren't you?
And Wolfpack fans will cite difficulties around kind of getting regular games for the North American players, especially as they stepped up the divisions, and to win stepping up the divisions. Quinn Nguati wasn't going to be a Super League player by playing a year in League One, 2 years in the Championship. He wasn't going to be a Super League player at the end of that process, I don't think.
No, and this is the problem, isn't it?
But they don't have anywhere to play them, and then it's hard for those players to get visas to play in the League One, in League One clubs where they might need to play, or even as community clubs, because they don't have the standing in the game. So I personally strongly believe the Wolfpack should have had a reserve team that was in some sort of competition in the US and in Canada, but there's logistical issues there as well, because Toronto, whilst it's in North America, is not actually that close to the Atlanta Rhinos or the Jacksonville Axemen. It's close-ish to Philadelphia Fight and people like that, but it's not. If we think driving across the M62 is a ball ache, imagine not being paid and having to make your own way 8 hours, 10 hours, or fly in for 3 hours, even. But yeah, there's a gap there, isn't there? I say.
Yeah, this is the thing that has to inform any kind of level of expansion, because there's nothing actually about the way that Toronto have gone about things that you couldn't have seen happening in any other big European capital city that you chose to put a franchise in or to start a team in.
Although
there's nothing.
But you've got to say, we didn't choose Toronto. Toronto chose us in a way.
Yes, I know.
No one was coming to say,
and that's the problem.
I want to put Rome in the Super League. I want to put Amsterdam in the Super League. I want to put Berlin in the Super League. But someone said, I want to put Toronto in the Super League.
Yeah, no, you're right, of course. But I mean, that says something that we're being proactive, we're being reactive rather than proactive, and saying where we want teams and what do we want. What is our commercial imperative for the development of the game?
And then that speaks to a lack of
Yeah, every decision that's happened around Toronto has been reactive since day one, and we need to get out in front. The game, needs to get out in front and start actually making clear decisions about what the league looks like from 2022 onwards, because 2021 is going to be a recovery year. I think everyone sees that, but 2022, that's where you need to be putting your plans in place to actually know exactly what you want to do with the game. So yes, in brief.
Yeah, some fair points and criticisms that I don't think have been really discussed in this whole conversation so far. But let's get on to some of the news. And a lot of it's going to be telling everyone what people have said, but some people might not have had the chance to follow up all these stories. If you are, get on Love Rugby League, get on 4020 News, get on Total RL and read the stories as well. But yeah, do you want to start with what Toronto captain Josh McCrone came out to say sort of after the news was announced?
Yep, so Josh criticised the lack of support the Wolfpack have had after they pulled out of the remainder of the 2020 season. Writing on Twitter, always a good place for friendly views, Macron says, NRL bending over backwards to keep the integrity of the competition by relocating clubs and families, all the while we are being left by the RFL/Super League to fend for ourselves during a pandemic in which limited clubs could survive in our circumstances. No home games, no visas, not the right visas anyway. Minimal support, but expected to carry on as normal. NRL salaries higher, broadcast deal larger, greater central funding from clubs. Obviously, all those things are connected. The extra revenue the NRL has generated from expanding obviously isn't what the English game wants. Hopefully, they can prove me wrong in 2021. If you don't believe that the appetite for rugby league is in Toronto, ask anyone who's witnessed the Den in person.
To unpack that a little bit, the NRL has been able to do all of the bending over backwards because of the greater revenues and greater central funding it's able to provide. So this is something that I don't always think people appreciate, that the Super League clubs aren't rich, and the Super League itself isn't rich.